All right, good afternoon, everyone. Today is April the 2nd of 2025, and we're here today to meet with USGS, and time is 1:06 p.m. So I am Byron McDaniel, Chairman of the Board and Commissioner for District 3, and I'll start to my left here, and we'll do introductions around the table, sir.
Yeah, Mike Buck, Commissioner for District 1.
Sean Fletcher, County Manager.
Mark Denreader, Director of Community and Economic Development.
Hi, I'm Courtney Ambrose, Physical Scientist with the USGS.
Megan Bell with the USGS Colorado Water Science Center. I'm the Chief of the Lakewood Hydrologic Investigations Unit.
Okay.
And Kelly Paco, Hydrologist with the Colorado Water Science Center.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, if you hit the, there we go. Good. All right. Do we need to let them do their introductions again since their mics were off, do you think? Or do you need it for the record? Yeah, if you don't mind, just for the record, so we got it. All right.
I'm Megan Bell. I am with the USGS Colorado Water Science Center. I'm the Chief of the Lakewood Hydrologic Investigations Studies Unit.
Kelly Palco, Hydrologist with the Colorado Water Science Center.
All right, thank you. So who wants to kick this off today?
Yeah, I'd be
Kelly's show.
All right. We'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Byron. Yeah, so mostly just wanted to discuss today, just kind of catch up on what we've been doing, the beginning of this project, and so just kind of give a run through on what's been done and maybe what can be done next. So, like I said, I'm Kelly, and this is the rest of the Colorado Water Science Center with me, Megan and Courtney. So yeah, I'll just go over a little bit of the background of the project area, a little bit of the history about USGS working in Elbert County, a summary of our upcoming scientific investigation report that will be out this year, and then just a time for like discussion about next steps and just our continued work in Elbert County. So just a synopsis, we are, as you guys know, in the Denver Basin bedrock aquifers. There are 5. We've got the Upper Dawson, Lower Dawson, Denver, Arapahoe, and Laramie Fox Hills. And in this map, let me get a pointer. The extents of the aquifers where they come out, they've got this bowl shape to them. And so those areas that you see on the map where the different aquifers are exposed shows these areas right here on this cross-sectional view, and the aquifers are confined in the Arapahoe and Laramie Fox Hills, which means that they don't have the same pressure that these upper aquifers do, and so the recharge and groundwater flow in these is a little shorter time lapse and just a little more exposed to different surface parts or surface recharge. But the aquifers are deposits that go from youngest to oldest as the further down you go. We have been monitoring water levels in Elbert County since 2015. The network, I initially started with about 40 wells, but currently we have 31, and sometimes it just gets reduced with different homeowners, landowners, accessibility issues. But we've got about 9 in the Upper Dawson, and we also have continuous records, which I'll go into in the next slide, but we have 2 continuous records in that aquifer, 7 sites in the Lower Dawson, 5 in the Denver, 6 in Arapahoe, and 4 in Laramie Fox Hills. So we've got a pretty good representation of the different aquifers within Elbert County.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
We started with 42 in the program?
About 40, yeah.
About 40?
Yes.
Okay, so not 42.
Oh, no, sorry. Just it could have been 42. Yeah, roughly 40.
Okay.
If the last report said 42, then
It said 42, and we had
Okay.
lost 9. So I had 33 currently in the system. So you're saying it's 31?
31.
Okay.
Correct. And so what that last slide was going is like overall sites, like I'll toggle back for a second, but in the Upper Dawson we have 9 and then 2 pressure transducers. So the way that we describe these different sites is each site we will take a discrete measurement. So that means go out to the site, lower a groundwater tape into the well and get a live recording of what that water level is at that time, and so we call those discrete measurements. And then we also have pressure transducers, so essentially they're lowered into the well within the water, and those can measure continuous groundwater levels on the hour. And so those are really helpful because they give us a broader picture of what's happening. You know, instead of just having a bi-monthly measurement throughout the year, then we get a continuous record of it. And after each site visit, these data are uploaded to our website, the National Water Information System. We call it NWIS. And so all these data is publicly available, and this shows a graph of what you guys can see. And if anyone ever needs instructions for how to access the sites in Elbert, feel free to email me. I can give you emails up there, but I can also give it to you after. And this is just kind of going to show what those different data look like, discrete versus continuous. So the dots are representing discrete measurements, and in this graph below, the red line shows continuous. So you can see where it kind of fills in the gaps of our bi-monthly measurements. And this gives a very tiny summary of the trends from our last SIR to now. I just wanted to point out they do have different scales. So the SIR from 2019 went up to a trend of about 5 feet per year, and this year it was about 3 feet as a maximum decreasing trend. But it shows Elbert County, and then the triangles, their directions are in accordance with the direction of that trend. So if it's facing up, it's a positive trend, meaning that the groundwater level was increasing. If it's facing down, the groundwater level was decreasing. The colors are associated with the different aquifers, and their size also correspond with the magnitude of the trend itself. And so we can see that compared to these two figures, there are a few more trends that are coming out in this most recent SIR or study. And more of that is just associated with the fact that you're going to have more statistically significant data the longer you have a data set for. Yeah.
I guess I should be talking in the mic, huh? Can we get a handout?
We can provide that afterwards.
Okay.
We don't have.
Sorry to
it
interrupt.
prepared
I
for
just-
right
Yeah.
now.
Sitting here and trying to keep up with what you're saying and just wearing my thumbs out.
Yeah, sorry.
We'll make that available to you,
All
but
right.
we don't have it right now.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. And again, this is just more or less just to point out that this is a table of the trends. We don't necessarily need to look at the numbers in depth, they're too tiny, but this is just showing that the importance of this continued investigation, the fact that this is a 10-year record that we have now, and it's important to have a continued record of this data because the longer data sets we have, like I said, the more statistically significant trends that will be gleaned out. So, I mean, we have a lot more data that can represent each aquifer. And so the trends did change slightly. Most of them are still decreasing. Some of them seem to be decreasing less than others, but I think that's iterating more that we are seeing more representation of each aquifer because there are more data in each. Because you can see down here in Laramie, we only have 3. Now we've got about 4. And the Denver trends from the 2019 report, you only had 1 well that was representing the entire trend of that Denver Basin aquifer. And so now we've got a much greater representation of what's actually occurring in that aquifer. So even though the trends are a little different, it's just showing how nice it is that you guys have continued this project and have continued to allow us to monitor it and keep up with these trends. We did see that the biggest trends, and I'll go back in that figure too, the biggest magnitude of trends are occurring along Highway 86 and around that border with Douglas County. And then also I just want to clarify that when I say statistically significant trend, it just means that there was a statistical analysis that was performed that shows that there was enough data to represent a trend. And even if a trend wasn't necessarily what we called statistically significant, it doesn't mean that there wasn't enough data. So like this is a well at Arapahoe 6 that it has plenty of data, but if you look at our table, it wasn't represented as statistically significant. So all that means is there's enough data, but there's just no trend.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Rather than just, and I know the numbers are small, do you have some data for the trends in feet and specifics? I know the numbers are small, but I'd like to see some data that, on a statistically significant trend, what that represents. Instead of a triangle saying that it's a decreasing trend, are we going to go through that today?
This table does have it, and yeah, we can send you that information, but this table does break down what those feet are per year.
Okay.
Yeah, in the direction.
I didn't know if you were going to speak to it. Or
Is there,
we can,
yeah,
we
so-
can look at it afterwards, after the meeting, we can analyze it ourselves as well.
Yeah. So part of, the report is almost published, and at that point, all of this data will be public. And so the interpretive information that we're providing here is for, I guess, we're presenting it, right? But it's harder for us to share it.
When will it be published?
Very soon. Right now, it's just with our editing group, essentially. So the findings have gone through pretty rigorous review, but it's just now we have to get
Because
it
a lot of the data that we get in the scope of work and in the contract, a lot of it references things that we should have already, or it's dated. There's information in here from 2004, just 20 years old, that is being referenced. So I'm concerned, when will we actually get it published?
Well, there is an SIR that was published previously. So the comparison figure that Kelly showed on the slide before, that had the trend information up to 2018, I believe it was through a 2019.
Yeah, the previous report did 2015 to 2018, and our current report does 2015 to 2023, the end of 2023.
Yeah.
So you should have some information on numeric trends that has already been published. I'm not sure what you're referencing with a 2004 date.
Yeah,
I don't
that's
have it
in
in
here.
front of me.
It's just based on 2004 estimates of the groundwater withdrawal from the Denver Basin Aquifer System. Wells within Elbert County accounted for 47% of total groundwater withdrawal from the Upper Dawson and Lower Dawson aquifers, 33 and 14% respectively. So it was just referencing old data, and I'm like, well, when are we going to get this information? I just didn't want to wait until mid-year, and it just takes more time. Everything seems to take a lot of time.
I'm thinking that's reference information from the existing model, the Paschke model from the Denver Basin. She did a groundwater model that was
Yeah,
published.
it is.
So the purpose of this study is not to update the numbers from Suzanne, from the Paschke model.
Yeah. Then, let me ask you just something else. As far as the number of wells we have, do you guys feel that's adequate? And what would the optimal number of wells being monitored be for this type of a study? We've gone from 40 or 42, now we're down to 31 or 33. And what's the plan to replace those wells? How's that step look? When are those going to be replaced? And we can get more of them online, especially if we're under contract for 40 or 42, and now we're down to 31, and I think it'd be nice to have more coverage. And how are those sites selected?
Right, there was this, when the study began, it's kind of an overestimate. They do more numbers than maybe what's needed in anticipation of homeowner changes, of accessibility issues, of different changes. And so really, I think the number of wells matters is what's your end goal? Like, do you want an area to focus on? Because as far as representation, there are numbers of wells that you have that are providing you trends that are occurring in each aquifer. Compared to, like I said, you had 42 wells in that previous study, but you only had one well in the Denver Basin from the previous SIR that showed you statistically significant trends. So at this stage, it's more about that long-term data than actual quantifiable wells that you have in the network. So what's important is keeping the wells that we have in the network and making sure that we are having good relations with the homeowners and upkeeping that. And we've done that. We've had a few, I think about 4 wells that have changed homeowners, and we've kept in contact and have knocked on the door and talked to them about the project and that information that they have. And so that's as far as we can go with staying in the network.
So, but as far as a plan to replace the 9?
It just depends on if it's,
Is that something we need to do and put out and ask for volunteers? And maybe you guys help us select in conjunction with the board or with staff, which area, what aquifer would be best to place additional well monitoring to bring us back up to the 42 or 40?
If the number is what's important to you, then we can absolutely do that.
What's important to me is to get the best analysis.
Right.
And not be in areas where we don't need to be, and make sure we're in the correct areas. Maybe areas that we have had some decline. Maybe we need another well there, or, I don't know. But I think we need a plan to replace those wells and move forward.
Okay. Then yeah, absolutely. I think that was kind of the intent of this discussion today, is more or less get a pulse on what you guys want moving forward. And so because it's never been communicated, we've had multiple presentations with the previous commissioners talking about the numbers that have been reduced over the years, and so that's never been something that's been communicated.
Yeah, and that's kind of why I wanted to have you guys here in person, was to get to know you guys, kind of do it in person rather than just sending over a review for us to look at. And we could kind of talk about a path forward and where we are, and kind of do it that way rather than just send something electronically.
We have a few slides at the end of the presentation where we kind of ask maybe some questions that can help us all figure out what we need to do next, or what would
Good.
help you.
Perfect.
What we can do to get you the information that you need to make the decisions.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So one thing that we looked into during this SAR that was not done previously, but was done for Douglas County in their 2015 SAR, was looking at, it's called a deviation from the median groundwater. So each well was looked at and had a median groundwater level from the beginning of the study. And that's meant to represent the most static condition that we in our data have. And so ultimately what this is trying to show is how the water levels are changing in each well, and then also in each aquifer as time's going on. So it's broken up, so 5 aquifers. This slide is showing both the unconfined aquifers. I think Lower Dawson was initially confined, but has changed over time as groundwater levels have decreased. And so you can see the wells with the greatest swings are those associated with the greatest trends on that previous map. And you can also, I want to note here, you see a lot of the swings are coming up and down every year, as opposed to the confined aquifers. You don't really get that replenishment that you're seeing in the other wells. And so this is kind of elucidating that if you want to focus more on the confined aquifers, or see that those are areas where you're seeing decreasing trends, but maybe not as much replenishment as you are with the unconfined. Just to kind of elucidate how drought and dry conditions, which I forgot to mention, the blue blocks are within wet periods, and the red blocks are within drought or dry periods. And you can kind of see how those climatic effects impact the wells in each aquifer. And you can see that the confined aquifers are a little more susceptible to that. So the numbers that you want, Mike, are here. So this is a summary of each aquifer. So just an average of those trends for each aquifer. So this is a summary. They're pretty comparable to the trends from the last period. Some of them, again, like I said, have changed a little bit because we have more representation because it's been a longer term study. Now we have 10 years instead of just 3. And this, again, the largest trends that we're seeing are near the border of Elbert County and along Highway 86. Those departure figures that I was showing are showing that it kind of supports what we're seeing in our trends, that they are going down, and they are negative more frequently than positive. So it's just, yeah, again, another way to say the water level trends are going down. And this is the part where we want to show you what we've done and then see where you want to go next. So are water level trends meeting your needs? What are your scientific groundwater needs? What answers are you looking for? Do you want a bigger network, or do you want different methods? Because we can also discuss different scientific approaches than just water level trends.
Well, I'm not an expert. So what I'm looking for from you guys is what your recommendations are. Do we need a bigger network? Do we need to be in certain areas of the county? And where might those areas be? If it was your county, if it was your plan and your monitoring system, what would you guys do? Would you do anything different than what we're currently doing?
Right, and that's a tricky one, because we have to be, we are a provider of science to resource managers. So we have to be careful not to provide a recommendation, right, a prescriptive sort of response for you. But we can help assess your network to help you to like set it up so that we can better answer your questions. You have the information that you need. So you would have the water levels, where you want them, and the aquifers that you want them. But I think we can't give you that answer right now. That's something we'd need to take back and have a conversation with you about exactly what it is that you're looking for and how we can give you that information so that then you can make an informed decision.
How would you describe a future water supply gap? What's the definition of that?
The definition of a future water supply gap?
Yeah, you referenced that. Approximately 68% of the Elbert County lies within the South Platte River Basin, where the state projects future water supply gaps. So when I hear words like that, it's concerning to me. So I thought, well, these guys are coming in, let's ask them.
Sure. Well, I think that's, is this again from the Paschke 2011?
Is this from is this from Paschke 2011, or is this from
I
the
don't
previous
know.
SIR?
It's basically what it is. It's statement of work. It's from the USGS statement of work.
There should be a reference after, like a citation. Because neither of us authored those, but, which makes it challenging.
But the definition, what?
Well, there's a
whether you
difference,
authored
there's a
it or not,
difference
well.
between the demand and the supply. Right, that's what that means to me.
And like I said, I'm not an expert, so when I see things like that in a report, whether it's from you or whether it's from some other hydrologist or a scientist, it's concerning to me.
Yeah, so what I read that is that there's a difference between the demand and then what the current, at that time, what the currently understood supply would be based on whatever analyses that were done and the information that was provided.
Right, because I think if it's referencing the 2011 report, which is why we're asking, Suzanne did a model of the entire Denver Basin aquifer, and essentially, like, her conclusion was that using groundwater supplies from the Denver Basin aquifer was not sustainable, and so she did a model that looked at pre-development water levels and then modeled it out to 2053, and essentially it said that that's not a long-term source of water supply, and that was her conclusion from that report.
So why are those reports included in the documents I received from you guys if you don't intend to reference them or use them? It's underneath your heading with a statement of work, and then you're referencing all of these other individuals and their work, but then you disavow or you say, hey, we don't know, or
Well, we weren't the authors of that work, but I mean, it's all USGS work. And I think it's more taking the statements in context, right? We want to be careful because we aren't looking at that document. And I know we sent you the scope of work, but we want to make sure that we don't misrepresent what's in there because we don't have it in front of us. But we reference other works because there are people who have done studies, and we certainly don't want to be duplicative and redo work that's already been done. And so if we can provide in the introduction or in previous studies or the background information, if we can rely on other folks' work, and part of that is a requirement by us that when we posit something, so this is what the groundwater supply is, or this is what this we have to also say where that came from, right? So we have to essentially show our work. So we cite lots of information and lots of publications, because we've read them, and we said, okay, well, this fits here, this supports this statement that I'm making here to show that this is why Elbert County is asking us to do this work, essentially.
Right, Elbert County is in the Denver Basin Aquifer, and the studies on the Denver Basin Aquifer already show that groundwater cannot be the sole source as a sustainable source of groundwater supply. So that was the beginning of this project. At least my understanding is that Elbert County was trying to understand how they fit into that equation of the Denver Basin Aquifer.
Yeah, it does say most of the water needs of Elbert County are met by groundwater from the Denver Basin. Well, if it says most, my next question is, what other sources does Elbert County have, if any?
I'm not familiar with the other sources. I know that was.
Me neither. But it said most, so I thought I'd ask, so.
I think that there was a report that was done by the Elbert County Board of Commissioners that we referenced from the 2019 SIR that was done, that on some of the county websites, it does mention that it was like 60% of the water needs are met, and it doesn't mention the other sources, but yeah.
I don't
Yeah, I
think
don't
we
know.
can give you details on your water supply, unfortunately.
Okay. Well, until we see the other data and the actual numbers and everything else, I don't really have any more questions for you. And maybe we could meet again, because I have a lot of questions in regards to the contract itself.
Right.
And just some clarification, and I don't think we need to go into the details of it, but at some point I'd like to maybe reach out to you and say, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? And maybe do that.
Yeah, I think it would be really great if you can provide us like a list of your questions that you have, especially on the scope of work, and we can definitely respond to those.
Okay.
As you have those, as we're able.
See,
and as you have
that's
those
perfect. That's
questions.
perfect. That way I don't have to go down through a list of questions for the next hour. Well, what about this? How about that? You know,
But if you can provide that to us, then we can absolutely answer them for you.
okay.
Or point you to someone who can answer them for you. You know, we aren't the only ones out there. That's one of our benefits as our agency, is like there's a lot of expertise that doesn't sit just right at our office. So you have questions that Kelly and Courtney and I don't have the direct answers to. We can get you the answers.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. And then can I get your phone numbers and your cards before you leave today?
Absolutely.
Okay, great.
So I'll just include my questions with Mike's, and I guess the bottom line, the point I want to make clear is, you know, we're charged with approving or developments, things of that nature coming into the county, and there's a lot of concern about the water out here, especially the northwest corridor and the north central part of this county. So we got to be very careful. That's what we do. So that's why we're asking you so many questions, because everything we do is based on water conservation here that we're trying to do. So just want to let you know why we're asking so many questions. And I'll just include my questions with Mike's, and we'll go from there.
Okay, that would be great. And we did put these questions up as questions beyond water level trends, because we are aware that, you have development on the table and you need to be sustainable with your water plan. And so, we've sort of talked internally like, well, is our water level trends really going to get you that answer that you're looking for, right? There may be other methods where that will provide you more of the information that you're looking for. So if we can kind of drill down on what questions you have, and we can figure out what scientific information do you need so that you can answer that question.
You might have a different perspective when we get what significant means to you guys.
P-value of a
Right?
point.
What's significant to you may not be significant to
Yeah.
us, or vice versa.
Right.
Our line of questioning might change, or our thought process might change just by that one simple thing.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see the numbers, talk to you a little bit more, and our whole perspective could change just based on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're using the term significant is really loaded with the USGS, right?
It is. It's loaded.
We're really careful when we use the term significant, and we always say statistically significant, because we don't call things significant trends unless we can look at the numbers and we see that it fits a definition of statistically significant that we define in our report, and that goes through our pretty rigorous peer review process and internal review process. So, we've got a p-value of, I think it's .05,
Yeah.
.01 that we use, and so, that's all outlined. Now, what that means for you, where you draw your line, like as far as feet per year and what's acceptable, that's your
Yeah,
decision.
'cause when I hear significant, I'm thinking, is that 50 feet? Is that 100 feet? Is
Yeah.
that, what is that?
Right,
I have
right.
no idea.
So when we say statistically significant, we're saying that the trend exists. The trend is statistically significant. We're not saying that the magnitude of the trend reaches some statistically significant value for you.
If there was a flag, let's say you, all of a sudden in the reporting analysis, you notice something, would you then read and say, hey, we've noticed something different happening in this particular well? We had a more than statistically significant drop. Would that trigger something to you guys to reach out to us and alert us? Is there anything in place that may happen? Or would we wait till the next report to 2028 and all of a sudden we see it on a report years later?
I think the homeowners are aware of their water levels, right?
Right, yeah.
So there is sometimes a conversation that happens. I think if there's a big change, we'll say,
I've gotten
pumping
calls
or-
from some of those homeowners.
Yeah, I think we keep up good relationships, and we go, after we take a water level, we try to knock on the door, say hi, say this is what your water level trend is, this is what it was before, and then we make sure we stay in contact with them and they have our contact information if they want to look at it in prior years. And so I think that's what we try to do. So we have those relationships established with most of the homeowners in order to let them know if it does seem different, because that is always the
So
question.
the homeowner might be aware, but not necessarily the county until the next report.
we don't have a formal
Trigger.
trigger, right, where we'd say, we better let the county know.
Yeah, I got you.
We could sort of, I don't know, because I'm not sure how we would set that up, but we could talk about doing something where if you're out and you see something, we could, transmit in an email or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, typically if it's a 1 foot, 1 foot and over a number of years, and all of a sudden you see a 50-foot drop or a 20-foot drop, we might want to have some type of trigger in there.
And I would imagine we would want the homeowners to also be involved in that,
Oh, for
so
sure.
that we're not transmitting information on their wells without them being in the loop.
Yeah.
Because that's a big concern. Our data are public, they're published. Anyone can look at them. However, we are cognizant of the fact that people are allowing us into their space to take these measurements, and we would just want to be careful with that. But we can sort something out, I think.
Any other questions?
Just a plan forward. You maybe had a couple of slides that we could talk about as far as a plan forward, but reintroducing those additional sites, I would like to explore that, get those back up and running, get as much coverage as we can. And they were selected at that particular site for a reason. And we should look at that, say, hey, do we want to re-implement them near there, or where might be a better place to do it? And then how would that be initiated? Was that county initiated with the citizens? Is that you guys reaching out, or how does that work?
Right.
I wasn't here for the initial, when it was set up initially.
Yeah, I think it started essentially that there are some wells that are focused on the more developed areas. There's also wells that are focused on less developed areas, because those are kind of our sounding board for if that area isn't getting extremely pumped, how is this aquifer behaving versus areas that are more pumped areas. But it also kind of depends on if you want your focus to be on areas that hey, we've got this 10-year network, and we see that these wells in less developed areas aren't changing as much as wells in developed areas. We can focus on that, just depending on what you want.
So here's the thing. We don't really have anybody on staff or on the board that is a water expert. So we're relying on you guys as the experts. We're contracted with you guys. We're paying a lot of money, but we're relying on your expertise. And we're kind of at your mercy to say, hey, this is what we recommend you guys do, and this is where we feel you should put them, and this is why. But to ask one of us, I don't know, Sean, I don't think, Sean, you're not a water water guy, I don't, right? So none of us are. So that's where the problem lies. If we had someone on staff that was an expert, we'd say, okay, well, you handle it, this is your baby, you make this happen, and we want this study to be done. We don't have anybody like that.
So
Now, we maybe put an advisory board together, I don't know, with people that have some expertise, but
I think we could probably do some preliminary steps where we take a look at where we have lost wells and where we're able to identify why we lost those wells, right? And then take a look at the coverage. It would be a pretty high-level conversation, you know, as far as like, these are the aquifers where we lost wells, or this is the geographic area where we lost wells. These are the wells that we currently have in place, and kind of start from there.
make some recommendations on where we should, if they should be replaced nearby those other ones that were lost, or if you'd recommend other locations. And then we could work jointly, or however we wanted to do it, to get those back online.
Yeah, I think it would definitely be a joint conversation. As I said, we're really limited in as far as recommendations and prescribing actions. That's who we are as the USGS. We're not a resource manager, essentially. We provide the science for folks to help you make those informed decisions.
So what are other counties doing? Sorry to interrupt you, but what are other counties doing as far as being able to make those informed decisions if they don't have anybody on staff that's an expert in the field?
Well, that's a really good question. I think that sometimes we can. You know, we can undertake an interpretive study, right, where we collect the data, and we just have to make sure the guardrails are pretty tight as far as this is what we're going to do, right? And I think the other thing is we can collect data, and then you can have other folks make those prescriptions. You know, you can hire consultants to take our data, because all of our data is publicly available, and to make prescriptions for you, you know.
Yeah.
And then other folks, you know, we also have, I'm not sure how much of it happens in Colorado. I came up from New Mexico a while back, and so I have some experience in the municipal programs there. And we'd have municipalities team up, you know, on things. So it was more of a holistic thing. So if you wanted, we'd sort of combine their well networks so that everybody was getting essentially a more complete picture, and sometimes at a reduced price, because we can sort of manage it as one project. You know, it takes fewer man hours that way, staff hours. So people are just going at it different ways. You know, some people will hire one person or half FTE or something to make some of those decisions.
Contract. Gotcha. But it's not a typical consultant-client relationship that we have with you guys.
Correct, right. We view this as a partnership, right? We're in a partnership with you. And it is different, and because we provide unbiased science, right? So what we provide to you may not be the answer that you want, but it's the answer that is, right? Based on the science.
Gotcha. You provide the factual data. What we do with it is up to us.
Correct,
Got
right,
it.
right. And we can even interpret that data, but as far as that final decision, we do not make that you'll have to
And
look
or
at those.
recommendations.
Right.
Stay away from
We just have to be careful with those.
Yeah, okay. I appreciate it. That's all I had. I appreciate it.
John? Mark?
Yeah, if I may, Commissioners, thank you. I believe that the first question I had was already answered, the question that Commissioner Buck presented. I understand USGS, then you provide the data, right? But in your report, do you do actually some type of interpretation or analysis? For example, okay, which aquifer is trending down the most? Looks like in the data here presented, it was looked like the Lower Dawson at that 1.11 figure. What does that mean? Is that normal? Is that alarming? That type of thing. Would you provide that kind of information in your report?
So I think that's hard to answer of, you know, what's normal and what's not normal. And that's, I think, where we're limited is it's downward. So if that's something that's concerning to you, then we can do more study. But yeah, that is the aquifer that is going down the most, and it was also the aquifer that's, I think it's drilled into or is a significant water supply in Elbert County.
Right, so this is one of the cases where we don't attach those judgments sort of value-based, where we say, this is concerning, right? Has to be a statement that you make. Now, if you said, could you tell us what would be concerning? That's a different question, right? That we can talk about. We've talked a little bit, there's the Denver Basin model does exist, right? But that's for the entirety of the Denver Basin. There are ways to drill down into that model to make it focused, more like a child model, so it would be more focused on your area, that maybe could provide different information or might answer your questions a little bit better than the numeric trends that we're able to do with the water levels. But that's kind of a different thing. We'd have to figure out what that looked like and scope that out and work with you all to figure out what that would look like.
Thank you. Also, how many years of data do you need to have sound figures, right? I mean, what numbers, when we get numbers that actually mean something? I know we have now close to a 10-year record, so is that substantive enough, or is more needed in terms of length of time?
Well, I think that, again, that was kind of shown in like the previous SIR compared to this one. It's not saying that the results from that previous SIR, if they were statistically significant, were bad or not representative. It's just that statistically speaking, the longer time you have data, the more representative it can be. And so I don't know that there's necessarily a way to say like 10 years is the best or like 3 years is too little. It's just with more time, it is more representative data.
Right, so some of the yearly ups and downs, right? You might have a year where it's really dry, and so you pump aquifers really heavily, and so you would see that. And on a 5-year span, that would stand out, right? That could really affect what that trend looked like. But if you have that over 10 years, you've got more of the more average years that kind of even that out. So it's not quite as much of an outlier or like the leverage. It's not weighing as much into that final number. So again, it's a non-answer to some extent. But essentially, long-term monitoring gives you the best idea of what's really going on. And when you decide we have enough information is really a personal decision, like, okay, we feel confident with this, that we know what's going on.
So with that in mind, it sounds like we really need someone who can interpret it for ourselves, someone on this side who's looking at the data you're giving us, but looking at it in a perspective that answer the questions we have. Because it doesn't sound like you're going to give us specific guidance on what we're asking, but you provide the information publicly, right?
Right, and we can interpret that data to some extent, right? But as far as telling you this is what you should do, we won't do that for you. That's not. So we can essentially line it all up for you, right? If you do, this is what this scenario might look like. This is what this scenario might look like. This is what this scenario might look like. But when it came down to it for you all to decide which scenario you want to go with, we would not tell you which one is in your best interest.
Thank you.
Yeah, and finally, if I may, you mentioned there are other scientific approaches available. Just curious as to what those would be, and then what is our current approach called?
Right, the current approach is just, it's a water level monitoring or water level trends. And so that's just our current approach is just looking at, it is an interpretation of those trends statistically and saying whether they're going up or down. And so like Megan was kind of mentioning, there are other counties in Colorado that we've worked with that some of them are doing groundwater models. So like we said, we could use Suzanne's model and focus in on Elbert County and update it. Since that study was put out in 2011, we could update it with current pumping results right now. There's also other counties that are doing, and I think I've presented on this before, but to previous attendees, but there's something called groundwater age tracing. And so essentially what you're doing is you're figuring out how long it takes your water to move throughout the system. So it tells you a couple of things. It tells you aquifer vulnerability. So if you were to drop a plume of contaminants at this source right here, you would know it takes 5 years or less or more to go to a different source or an outlet of water. It could also tell you aquifer sustainability. So it essentially lets you in on how groundwater moves in your system. And so it could tell you if that aquifer is more susceptible to climatic changes. Because you know if it's a 5-year or like 1-year period, you know it's more susceptible to those short-term changes. And then there's also different ways to measure aquifer storage. So if you want to know quantifiable amount of aquifer storage and how that's changing over the years, so to give you, instead of a foot per year, to give you a volumetric idea of how that aquifer storage is changing. And then it could also help us hone in on your vulnerable areas. So we can't say, this area is doing really bad. We could just say this area is vulnerable to overpumping or to its current pumping demands.
Would it be any benefit for us to meet biannually, or would that help so we can get some of these? Yeah.
Yeah, we're more than happy to meet with you anytime you'd like.
Yeah.
We've started redoing our comprehensive plan. And as I mentioned earlier about development, that's a big thing. We don't need to be out of water in 50 years or 100 years, and that's what's concerning everybody here.
Yep. Yeah,
Just don't want to sit here, wait another year, and then get this uh-oh moment. So this is something that also would help us now to incorporate into our comprehensive plan as we go forward. And start restricting or start asking for zero escape type stuff, things like that. So it's just stuff that now is a good time. So thank you for being here today. For that. Do you have any questions for us?
I think so.
Oh, thank you for inviting us.
Yeah.
We like this relationship. It's nice to work with a community and to be, involved in the communities that we live in and near. And water is important, obviously, to all of us. And so we're happy to do whatever we can and continue to, keep this relationship going. We're happy to help you figure out what information you're looking for, and then as we can, provide that information for you.
So the information that you put up on the slides, those numbers that we really couldn't see and we didn't have a handout, that will provide us with the actual data that we're looking for, that we can analyze that, and then I'll probably call you and say, hey, what about this? And I have some questions in regards to the contract. So it won't be a year, I'll tell you, it'll probably be next week. But I want to see, I'm looking forward to seeing that, and then doing some, basic analysis, and then asking you questions in regards to that, if you don't mind.
Yep. I'm thinking, so we have the report right now, as I said, is with our publishing group. They do an editorial review, and then it'll go through kind of a final okay to make sure that we're meeting all of we have this thing called Fundamental Science Practices, FSP, which essentially just makes sure that we are meeting our standards for the science that we're doing and that we're not saying things we shouldn't be, really. So once that goes through that final review, then it will be published. Potentially, we could also get a courtesy draft out to you that would be really strictly limited on who we would want. That would just be not available to the public. It would need to stay really internal to you. That would give you that information, with keeping in mind that everything is considered preliminary until it actually is published. So we can talk a little bit about that if you'd like, because that report will have the trend numbers in it.
And when do you anticipate that being published?
In the next few months, I think. As I said, it's going through its editorial review, and then it'll need to go through layout, it'll go through our final review, but then it'll be published on the web. What is it, April? Probably in this summer. But we
Okay.
can potentially get something to you earlier.
If you could, just kind of in the back of your mind, start thinking about how we can implement a plan to get those 9 wells
Yep.
back online, and what I know you can't give us guidance or recommendations, but, think about, maybe give us some options.
Sure. Yeah, I think so. Maybe we can plan to meet again at some point in the future. We can sort of set a rough, whether that's 3 months or 4 months or however long out. And in the meantime, we can take a look and try to get some information on what wells were included previously, why they fell off, and then whether or not we all feel like they maybe we should look for information there, or whether we think that's already kind of covered. So we
Yeah,
can have
or
those
what other
conversations.
areas might be an option for us
Right,
if it's not that location.
right. And there is some well monitoring that's happening in Douglas County, and I believe south of us also, south of here. We have several different offices, so we have some groundwater projects that happen out of our Pueblo office, but they're north. So it's also possible that we can kind of look outside of your network.
I was just gonna, when you brought that up, I was just gonna say, is it possible to get the information from, let's say, eastern Douglas County? Because I know they have a well monitoring program in eastern Douglas County. Would it be possible to get some of that information just to kind of compare and see what's happening there versus what's happening in Elbert County?
We haven't done trends on that data, but that data is available. It's on that same NWIS website, and we can show you how to view that,
Okay,
because it is there. Mhm.
yeah. It mentioned it in here. It was 27 wells or whatever it was. I don't remember the number.
And their monitoring frequency is a little bit different than yours, so it's not as easy to directly compare it.
What's their frequency?
Biannually. So they do before pumping and then post-pumping measurements.
Okay.
So it's not quite as easy. However, that's one of these opportunities where it's like, well, you want to see a larger picture of what's going on. Well, we've got neighbors with wells who are maybe outside Elbert County, but if we have a relationship with some of those people, because we try to work across everyone, we're not bound by any sort of political boundary or municipal boundary. We can try to make those connections too, so that we're doing a more efficient, job. Like I said, we don't want to duplicate work for anyone. We don't want to
Yeah.
do any of that.
Well, the only reason I brought that up was because a lot of our growth is happening on our western border, which is their eastern border, and if they have analysis near the border of the 2 counties, we may be able to grab some of that and say, okay, well, this is kind of like having another well online.
Right. Yes.
Just a thought. Just a thought.
We'll take whatever we can get.
That's right.
I think the general consensus is we've got to control the growth in this county, and we're just about to get to a critical phase. So
Yeah.
with that being said, you got anything else, anybody?
I don't.
Okay. Ladies, thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And we'll end this meeting. It is 1:59. Thank you. We're adjourned.